Hello, hope you're doing well today. Welcome to another video. In this week's presentation, we're going to be looking at um, this last period in life, this late adult period, and some of the issues and concerns, and also some of the good things associated with it. And this is sort of the end of the road, right? Like this class, we started all the way with conception, and it goes all the way to our last days in this last period that is kind of typified or characterized by this increased reflection, this increased life review, and looking back over who we were and who we've become and who we were to other people and who we were to ourselves. And there's this interesting thing that this is a stage none of us are in, but it's a stage that's coming for us all, right? And this is going to be kind of my point, is that if you're a 20-year-old listening to this and you're thinking like, well, and I know you're probably not because you're all smart people and you're able to have foresight, but if you're sitting there and you're thinking like, why would I have interest in a presentation like this? It's because this is going to be you, right? And how you live now affects what the quality of these last years will be like. All right, let's jump into it. Hope you're well. Grab a coffee and a nice chair, whatever, however you do. Shout out to my NU people. Hope you're well, and let's jump into it. So this will be the last time in this class that we bring up Erickson. And, maybe it's a time to give a little bit of tribute to the guy. It's like, if you remember the first presentation I made, maybe I didn't even show you this because I'm actually misremembering, and this is from a lecture I give my psych students at Conestoga, but one of the things I always tell about Erickson is his story is interesting. Like, he, sorry if I seem a bit weird, I'm just dealing with a bit of stomach issues these days, but, just gotta breathe through it once in a while. Erickson had this, right, like his story is interesting. He was a friend of Anna Freud. He was never really interested in psychology until he was going through a bunch of stuff himself, and then he went to psychotherapy and had experienced psychoanalysis and got so much value from it and learned so much that he dedicated his life towards it. And he's a guy that didn't even have an undergrad in psych, but by the end of his career, he's teaching at like Harvard and Yale, and he's, maybe one of the most influential developmental psychologists. Maybe he's number 2 after Piaget, right? So, really interesting person. And we've been talking about him throughout this course, and the idea is that he says that at the end of life, it's like basically, do you feel like you have integrity? Ego integrity, right? So it's like, okay, well, if you view someone as someone with integrity, well, what about yourself? Right, which what the ego in front of it means. It means like, how much integrity do I think Mike has? Like, do I think that some of the questions, like the sense of like, did I live a useful life? Right now I'm in this hypothetical, now you're at the stage where you're at the end, and all those questions, who the person has to decide, like who has she been? How she lived her life? Like, what opportunities have they had and used and had and let slip away? And coming to terms with ideas around death, and And the, if to say that death is the most confusing thing to humans, I think, like what's it mean to not exist anymore? Like we understand physically what it means. It's harder to understand kind of psychologically, and then it's like also like it's not that it's hard to understand, but it's like hard to picture that our identity might. And then this, you can see this obviously brings up like religious questions too, right? Like if you have beliefs of what happens afterwards, maybe you don't, maybe it's not all over here. Maybe this is a stage one of a longer story, or maybe it's stage six of a really long story, or maybe it's whatever, right? But see how it's like bringing in these questions. And the reality is for people that don't have faith, this can be a scary time. Right, that this is like the most existential question is like, why do people have to die? Why, like existential meaning questions related to existence. Why does existence end? Why do our loved ones leave? And then we have to try to put together our lives as best as we can and deal with it. And it's like we never talk about it. It's like, so today I want to talk about it. And I want to talk about things like complicated grief. And I want to talk about things like, what does it mean to lose someone that we haven't, that we have unfinished business with? And what does it mean to, I'm not being super articulate right now, but I'm kind of just playing with this idea of, it's really the deepest part of life is that life is finite, just physically. And then, okay, so Mike, quit with the trip out. Back to the slide. So it's like, that's the idea, right? Is that integrity, you've heard the word integrity before, like someone of integrity is somebody that you respect, and someone that says what they do, does what they say that they're going to do, and someone that's trustable and trustworthy and loyal and dependable and a good person. And Erickson thought that if you can look back over your life, and it's like, you're not perfect, of course, and I could make you a list of how I'm not perfect, but like, you don't have to be perfect. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying to be a good person. It's about respecting yourself. Right? And he warned that if you don't establish a sense of integrity, well, then you reach the end and you wish things were different and you don't have time to change anything. And he said that's a terrible psychological position to be in. The worst psychological position to be in is wishing things were different and lacking the resources to do anything about it. And one of the biggest resources is time. This, I thought that this guy's picture, and it's, you can see from the little image source, Note underneath, I just got this off Google. I think when I made this slide, I probably just searched the word despair, and that picture. It's like maybe that. I'll just read into it a bit, right? Because I obviously don't know who that guy is, but see that guy being a company guy, man. Maybe he's a guy that worked hard for a company his whole life. He missed lots of kids' birthday parties to get ahead, and he's trying to, in his mind, he's trying to work hard for his family that he rarely sees because he's working so hard. And then, you finally get to the end of your career and you retire, and your company gives you, a pizza party, and there's a new person in your desk the next day, and you realize, like, damn, this thing that I stressed about every single day, this thing that, like, got in between me and experiencing life, and this thing that, like, I prioritized over family, like, replaced me immediately. Like, what did I give my life to? And we, like, worry so much about stuff. We worry so much about the opinions of people that don't really care that much about us and aren't going to be there for us when we need them. And yet we somehow let them speak to our psychology, to our understanding of ourselves, even though they don't deserve it. Our work becomes our God. And then we get to a point where we realize that was a mistake. That really the simple things everyone's always said. It's like, without family, it's nothing. It's like, no one cares what your resume looks like when you're on your deathbed. But hopefully there's a few loved ones that care about you around you, easing your transition. And maybe waiting for you on the other side too. And I know we're supposed to be 2023, 2024, everyone's supposed to be like, go to like a secular school, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's like you've gotten your fill on that stuff. It's like you can teach anything unless you teach people that maybe there's... I shouldn't even finish that sentence. But like the garbage we let people teach, the low quality scholarship that passes as academia, and just the garbage you're fed. I don't know. There is always the chance that I'm the crazy one. But despair is this idea that I do have to say, though, every once in a while I get a message from one of you that recharges the battery in my back a bit. It's like, when you see people struggling to try to have integrity in a scenario where it seems like most things are for sale, it's like, tell them, because they're probably burning out. The way things have been the last few years, it's like most of the people that actually care are almost like sick now, right? It's like there is so much nonsense, so many lies, so much biting your tongue, so much agreeing with things that are insulting to your spirit. Was that for a weird rant? Okay. I love you guys. I hope you agree or disagree. It's like I hope that you have your own thoughts. Your profs aren't, they're not gods, but again, I don't even know your profs, right? So it's I'm making my point more towards academia in general and assuming what your profs are like. And it's just my own lack of feeling connected, I guess, to that world. And to be honest, I feel way more connected to the ones of you that care about this stuff than I do to other profs. Like, the reason I talk about this stuff is it matters. It's like, do you want to be at the end of your life and wishing that you had have actually like spoke up, or that you actually like lived the life that you wanted to live? And I'm not just talking about like what I'm talking about, you being true to you. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. No one's gonna be there. Like all these people that are trying to tell you how you're supposed to live and what you're supposed to say and how you're supposed to be, they're not gonna be there. Is This is an area that compared to other times in the lifespan, there is a lot less research on the older stages, right? Like especially compared to like 0 to 2 or even adolescence and puberty. And it's like the idea that those time periods have major kind of characteristic psychological states associated with it is pretty well understood. And one thing that we know is that as people get older, they tend to become more reflective, more philosophical. So like more thinking back over things. And it's like, okay, so you know that it's like, and that's compared to who they were before. So it's not even saying like everybody becomes a philosopher. It's just you're going to be looking back over things and analyzing your role in things more than ever. And so what are the quality of those reflections, right? Like, are they, again, filled with integrity or despair? And we know that there's like interesting connections here, right? Like I say, they're like those who achieve at least some level of self-satisfaction in life experience less fear of death. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like if you wish you could do it over and you want to change all these things and you feel like you're running out of time and death is the ultimate thing to avoid. But then when you're, it's not like people that have lived a life of integrity aren't afraid of death. It's that, well, it is that they tend to report less fear, but why? Why? Right? And it's almost like this idea of, like, I can remember my grandma, she was like kind of at her end and she was kind of like, I've lived a good life. I've, tried to be a good person. I've taken care of my family and I'm ready to rest. And that's a very different state than being overwhelmed with regret. right? That adults tend to respond to thwarted personal goals, like things that they wanted to do and never did, or things that regrets. And this is sort of my underlying point for this presentation, right? That like as you get older, you're going to get more philosophical, more reflective, more thinking about who you were and the type of relationships you had and the type of ways that you valued or didn't value people and yourself. And that this is going to be the major predictor of your mental health at the end of your life. And it's like if you care about that, then it's like, okay, well, how do we build in integrity, and how do we make sure that we land on the ego integrity side of this versus, right? How do we make sure we don't end up looking back over our life with despair? This is a picture of my grandpa who who just died. Um, it's what a guy, man. World War II vet, shooting torpedoing German U-boats in the St. Lawrence. You might not have known that the Nazis had their U-boat subs as far as the St. Lawrence. You might wonder why. It's because Canada was sending so many supplies to Britain, right? Because like if fighting is one thing, but your soldiers need supplies, and one of the ways Canada was heavily involved in World War II was in supplying the Allies, in addition to fighting. It was fighting. Like I remember one time at a Remembrance Day thing, standing with my grandpa, and it was like freezing cold. And I was like, I was asking him if he wanted my toque, and he was saying that standing in the cold's the least he can do. That it's like it's why I get up. You're Canadians. People fought for you to have freedom, not for you to be pressured to be certain types of people. It's like that's the whole thing. You live in a free country, and and we need to fight to maintain that. And anyways, it's like just seeing these pictures. It's like even right now I'm reminiscing. It's like, well, what does reminiscent mean? It means like this tendency to like look back over your memories, and there's a aspect of it that's like kind of the same as just like thinking about stuff, but it's like thinking about stuff from, you and your buddies get together and you reminisce about the good times. It's like, well, why? Because it's meaningful. It matters to you. It's like people that weren't there don't understand the same way. That Erickson thought that this talking about our life story is actually an important part of the preparation for death, psychologically, spiritually, socially. And that this is what is often in the literature called the life review, right? That like, and then so if you put all these things together, it's like, okay, well, what am I basically saying? That when you get older, it's like you're going to be aware of the fact that your days are numbered, and that understanding of that, or what is often called mortality, is forces you to have some real thoughts over the type of person you've been. And one of the ideas I'm presenting here, and it's related to the final assignment, is like use that knowledge, right? It's like it's a gift to you if you can hear it. It's like if you're 20 years old and you can spend an hour and lay out a plan of like how could I live my life and how could I deal with some of the problems I'm dealing with right now in a way that when I'm 80 and I'm looking back over my life I can feel proud of. It's actually an orienter. That's something that can steer your boat of life. I don't know, steer your boat of life, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. It's kind of like those in every movie or whatever. It's like the grandpa's like, well, back in my day, and then everyone kind of rolls their eyes, and it's like, that's fine, whatever. But maybe there's more going on there. Maybe this act of storytelling is actually a communication, emotional, social link between generations, right? And that maybe it's not only that they're teaching us stuff and building bond and community within the family by sharing these stories, it's actually helping them process their life. It's like, it goes to say the research at Reminiscent looks at how this reminiscence, this act of remembering, and health can be connected as a way of communicating experiences to younger people, right? And especially younger people that are important to them. It's like one of the healthiest things you can do with an older person is like talk about their early days. There's a reason why, like, if you go to a senior center and you have like an Elvis 50s night, it's like everybody's mood improves for the next month. Why? Because it's like reminding them of the glory days and that there's something psychotherapeutic in that. So bolts and bolts, just two people's last names, have this idea of how older adults maintain. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. You would expect that like the young, more energetic, maybe newer, maybe a little bit more eager people in like workforces or even in teams would outperform the older people. And you actually see that performance scores in organizations don't really indicate that at all. That actually older employees tend to outperform younger ones. And that's actually pretty interesting because if you look at it just from like a raw energy perspective, it doesn't really make sense. It's like how does like the 50-year-old at the work outperforming the much younger and maybe more energetic 25-year-old? And it's, well, because the 50-year-old sort of figured out the system and knows what to focus on and what not to, and is concentrating on their strengths. So what this is actually suggesting is like we actually don't see as much of a dip in performance in places like employment with age as you would expect. Now, obviously, there's exceptions, um, but one of the reasons is this ability to concentrate on what matters, on the things that are rewarded. So here, I want to keep going with this idea. So on the last one, I showed Vince Carter, right, as an older player. Um, Look at that dunk. And I wanted to make the point that, like, he played until his mid 40s when I think the average age in the NBA is something like 27. And it's like, well, how do you do that? And one of the ideas is this is like when he was at his peak. Like, that's the 2000 dunk contest in Toronto. Dunk, it's so ridiculous. That's Shaq, just mind blown. But it's this idea of like, as the person's getting older, as he got older, he was a good example, right? Some star players don't age well because they don't adapt to their changing sort of role. As Vince Carter got older, he's one of the best examples I can think of almost of a guy that was an all-star when he was in his prime, but kind of transitioned into a good team player as he got older and stayed relevant for a very long time by basically this idea of selective optimization with compensation. So selectively being good at the things that matter the most, and then compensating or like trying to reduce the negative sort of in the areas where you struggle. So this is a response to aging that entails selecting valued activities and dropping others, right? So what's this really mean? It means like he doesn't need to do windmill dunks like this anymore. He needs to hit his open shots. He needs to play good defense, and he needs to be a good teammate. And if he does that, he can stay in the league longer. It's like one of the things that you learn as you get older is, maybe like say with me with nipsing, it's like I don't know. I'm not like the new guy that's eager to join every single committee and everything. It's like at a certain point, I'm focused on just, if I can connect with you students and if I can hopefully make lectures that you like and if I can, be reasonable with my marking, hopefully things will work out. I don't have to like play the whole game with the whole administration almost, it's like, and maybe if I was a brand new teacher, I would feel like I had to, but it's like since I've been, teaching at the college and at U of W for a long time, it's like I know the game a little bit more. Not the game, but I know the idea, right? It's like take care of the students, take care of your course, and a lot of the rest is noise. Right, so this idea, I want you to know this idea, selective optimization with compensation. Response to aging that entails selecting valued activities, dropping the stuff that doesn't matter as much, staying good at what matters, and then compensating for whatever problems, right? So it's like, so like as Vince Carter got older, he was doing less of that stuff. He was doing more kind of, I don't know, I'll maybe drop the basketball metaphor, but it's like learning what matters, learning how to kind of cover up your weaknesses, but work on your weaknesses enough so it's not holding you back, and then learn what it is that has value that you do and focus on that. Selectively optimize and then compensate. I really hope you've enjoyed the course. It's been a pleasure being your teacher. Um, I'll save my reflections for the end, but it just needs to be said every once in a while that it's not missed by me how uniquely positive this experience has been. I don't know if I've had a negative interaction with any of you in 2 terms. I know at the beginning of the first term there was like maybe a bit of confusion over the textbook and some of that stuff that was, startup related. But like, no, you've just been fantastic people, fantastic human beings. Activity theory is as straightforward as it sounds. It's one of these things. It's like, yeah, you'd be healthier if you did a few push-ups every day and got decent sleep. It's not rocket science, but at the same time, that doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's easy to say that like, well, you'll be healthier long term if you just like kind of stay doing stuff, or if you continue producing activity. Right? What's activity? Like the activation, the opposite of stasis, or stasis. Is that even a word? I meant like just staying still. Anyways, to activate, right? It's like, oh, this machine's been activated. What's that mean? It's like doing stuff now. And this is like so important. This is like also the secret of depression. When, sorry, my stomach's just acting up. When we are depressed, we deepen our depression by stopping doing things that we took joy in before we were depressed. And so this is one of the kind of most important things I'll tell you for both yourself and for like your loved ones and for potential people you're working with, is that like one of the things to notice is when someone was like, oh, they used to love all this stuff and now all of a sudden it's like everything's dumb and they don't really care, and it's like, okay, well, one activity you can actually do with people or yourself is to like sit down and honestly have a conversation, possibly with yourself, and conversations by yourself as a side note work better on really long walks. And so have a conversation about, like, what was I doing when I was happier? Your brain will tell you. You just have to be mature enough to listen and then do it. It's like, well, you were reading more. You were maybe, getting out and going on walks. And it's like, okay, so Mike, I'm getting repetitive with my examples, but whatever. It's like, it's because that's the basics. It's like the basics are, it's like Carl Jung, the greatest ever, said, whatever, the greatest psychologist, in my opinion. Almost, I'm going to paraphrase, but like basically nothing, no ideas cured more people than long walks. It's like, why? Because you're being active, you're moving, you're breathing hopefully decent air too, and you're breathing deeper and different than when you're sitting moping, and we all can get there. It's like walking. So anyways, I almost got like almost preaching about the importance of walking, but it's psychotherapeutic. There's no doubt about it. It might be one of the most psychotherapeutic things. And this is sort of me just ranting about this topic, right? When I started this slide, I'm like, I can read this quick. This is going to be like a 2-second slide because you're all smart. You can all get it immediately, right? That like, oh, that's super interesting, Mike. People that stay active and socially involved are healthier. But it's like, what? That's actually sort of obvious, but completely true and entirely relevant. It's like, that's like the most relevant thing. It's like, keep your friendships because they matter, and have decent people around you, and do a couple push-ups and whatever, right? Squats, walks, dance, paint, do archery, throw axes, chop wood, make fires in your backyard like a midlife crisis. It's like in a fireplace, in a fire pit. I mean, I'm not suggesting arson. It's like, obviously, be human beings. And that in re-engaging that, so in depression theory, that's called reactivation, right? To reactivate someone that's depressed. Put the battery in their back. Get them back doing the things they were doing, which comes from a belief in the therapeutic power of behavior, right? In that behavior matters. This is like essentially a behavioralist idea that forget about your mood. Change your behavior, and your mood will have to catch up. Of course, staying in your bed all day keeps you depressed. Change your behavior, your mood will catch up. Right? That's like a key idea in cognitive theory, like CBT is kind of a more modern version of it, but the original big person in the theory of depression was a guy named Aaron Beck. You should look that guy up, Aaron Beck. I think for some reason his first name has 2 A's. I think his books, you'll find it has to do with depression. It's like he was epic, and then they took his kind of cognitive idea, and the CBT that you've all heard of is sort of a evolution of that idea, like, right? Same with like DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, like this concept of the intense connection between thought and behavior and mood. Again, I know my rants some people might like, and some people might not be your cup of tea, so you could always just wait till I flip the slide, pause it, write it down and fast forward to the next slide. I hope that's not how people watch lectures. That'd be a bit of a burn if that's how it is, but I want you to have the main points on the slide, right? And then I'm kind of talking around it to hopefully give it a bit of life. It's like, this is sort of the idea I was saying on, I can see myself going that direction, the direction of a bird watcher. I'm already like setting up traps, not traps, not before everyone gets upset. I don't mean traps for birds, camera traps. Like, this has a huge strap. This thing's, oh, where's the camera? Yeah, this is called the ape man. Like monkey, like ape man. It's just in case you ever want to get it, something like this. That's outside. It's like, I just want to show you because I don't know why not. It's cool. So inside the protective case, it's got like, it's weird because it's mirrored backwards. It's got like this, right? So it's like a night. It's a color, video, and camera, night vision. So I got a few of these for the backyard. Uh, but anyways, getting ready to take pictures because one of right, I'm way off topic, but no, I guess this guy's bird watching, right? So some of it's for birds because I usually have like I have a stick that I put near the bird feeder, and then this actually has on the bottom, it has like, you can screw it in. It's like a tripod. I have like this tripod anyways that like attaches to a stick that blah blah blah. And then the other one I just kind of face on the backyard sometimes. And that's where I got a nice picture of a possum the other day. There was a possum in our backyard. Anywho, adults that have more hobbies, report being healthier, having higher morale. It's like one of the best things for an adult. It's one of the best things for people. It's like I've made this. It's so weird. It's like it's so easy. This is like the hard thing in life. It's so easy to tell other people advice, and it's not always easy to like remember yourself. But it's so true that the more fascinated you stay in things, the more you allow your brain to just be like, whoa, that's cool, blah, blah, blah. That's like almost an anecdote or it's like, yeah, the anecdote, the opposite. It's pulling in the opposite direction of the stress of the world. It's like, it's psychotherapeutic. It actually is. And it is because meaning heals. Meaning heals. Does that work for you? It's like, I don't know, I didn't plan on saying that, but I think the idea is it does. It's like when you feel like what you're doing matters, all of a sudden your ability to handle stuff goes way up. It actually, no, it doesn't necessarily heal. It increases resilience. Meaning increases resilience. That's a better sentence. Or, I don't know, 3 words. Meaning increases resilience. Right? It's like the Viktor Frankl. If you have the why, then you'll figure out the how. And so my point here is that like staying engaged, staying interested, staying doing stuff is putting demands on your body to respond. Your body's responding. Some of that responding is things like literally the muscles in your legs responding to the demand of walking, the muscles in your shoulders responding to the demand of carrying a backpack. It's also the demand on your eyes following around stuff and like paying attention to stuff, your brain trying to stay cognitively alert. Maybe you're with someone and it's like the social practice and also emotional bonding and also ability to share and relate and let go of some of your stress. It's the fresh air. You get it. Okay. Now this is right? If I was just making this long rant about like engage, 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 right? And in the literature, there used to be like a term that people used, but I haven't heard it in a long time. But it was, you know, like people throw out the words, and some words are like kind of trendy for a while and then die off, and some become the nomenclature or like become the word. It's like it's just interesting how some trends stick. But anyways, for a long time, people use this concept psychological involvement. Like, how involved are you psychologically in what you're doing? Or are you just kind of like shifting through? Are you starting to disengage? So this would be sort of like, well, this is just another theory of late night, late life. Yeah, interesting Freudian slip. But yeah, it's like this shrinkage of the life space, right? That as we're getting older, you know, and maybe if say like somebody in a that as they're the thing is and you've maybe experienced it in your family, it's like it's a lot easier when people are getting older when they kind of go positive. But obviously there's a lot of scenarios where people go a bit more negative and can really withdraw and really they have this like that idea of the shrinkage of their life space, right? That like they're not doing the things that they used to do, almost the opposite of what I was just saying. Like it's like maybe the person used to do curling or used to do like, you know, go and play bridge or cribbage or whatever. Now they're not doing that anymore. They're not seeing those people anymore. And then maybe they used to go to church, but they don't do that anymore. So like that community's not there anymore. And now like going to the family things is like maybe a bit much, and maybe there's some issues and beef and whatever, and it's like so then it's the world smaller, 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 right? That there's less expectation. Maybe like say for example, if you're like already retired and stuff like that. So I say this increased individuality, but more just in the terms of like compared to say like me right now, it's like I can't just be like I'm just gonna go to Niagara Falls for the next 5 days. It's like, well, wait a sec, because I'm like supposed to take the kids to school in the morning and blah blah blah. It's like I, the idea is when you're at that stage, it's like the guy on the bench there, and that it can be associated with a psychological acceptance of that, and that's just how it is. It's like the idea isn't that you have to be super social. The idea is that a few quality relationships. You know, it's like the old idea 10 honest people can save the world. It's like a few honest relationships, a few can be the foundation, right? Like it's like family. And you know, some of the families biological and some of the families friends that are that close, right? And it's like that's the real foundation. Anyways, sorry. I should maybe trim some of these slides, but like I'm trying to kind of also reflect the vibe of the topic, right? This reminiscing idea and this idea of like there's not perfect answers for things, there's unknowns. Okay, anyways. Okay, so I want to kind of present this as this concept, right? And you can just jot this down that like successful aging is these things. And it's like, okay, so just do these. Just like keep good health, keep your mind strong, stay engaged. It's like these are, again, an easy list to make, right? But like even just the very first point, like just keep good physical health. And you know, if you can catch my satire, what I'm suggesting is like obviously a lot of these are easier said than done, and or not necessarily that easier said than done, but like require input and investment and long-term intention. It's like, okay, let's take me and you out of this. Let's just look at human beings like an alien from the outside, right? I haven't said that in a while. If we're looking at this situation like an alien studying human beings. We're like, okay, well, some people live longer, and some people in those final stages are like doing significantly better than others. And like, without being judgy or whatever, it's like, well, what do you mean by better? Well, in a way, better is like, there's a physical aspect of it, there's a cognitive aspect of it, there's a social aspect of it, there's a how you feel about yourself, subjective sense of life satisfaction aspect. There's like, and then it really seems to come down to how they make sense of it and how they view their limitations. It's like, does my back's bad, so now everything's bad? Or is it my back's bad, so now it's like, oh, my dumb back, and I still do stuff, right? I've used the example before of how last time of like how my grandma was a good example of that. My grandma Walsh, the wife of my grandpa, who I showed this picture earlier, that she'd be like, oh, my creaky bones, and she'd joke about it, but and she kind of dealt with it. So what I'm saying is like, she's complaining about the thing, she's not complaining about life. And that's a significant difference, right? That it's like, oh, I'm getting older, my knee's getting worse. I'm viewing my aging in terms of variability. It's not what it was a few years ago, like a variable that's changing, variability, right? Obviously, but that it's like, rather than universal decline. It's not that I'm just worse in general. It's that like everything is like how you view it matters. And that you have to be careful having super negative ideas because you can convince yourself of stuff. That's true for everybody, right? Okay, so like these two in this picture, it's like maybe well, what I like about that picture is just that they're obviously on bikes and it kind of makes sense for what I'm doing, but also that they're like smiling and hanging out kind of. It's like, without sounding corny, and I know my wife's not going to hear this because she definitely doesn't watch my videos, but it's like, that's kind of what I want. It's like, I hope that like we're still going on bike rides when we're older and laughing, and I'm making dumb jokes and she's saying I'm an idiot, but she's kind of laughing and she liked the joke. It's like, that's nurt that's that's a protective factor. As psychologists, we would view that as a protective factor, which is the opposite of a vulnerability. Older adults reap a lot of benefits of healthy choices made earlier, right? And it's like, I'm not here to preach to you about like, hey, if you go over there, I got a bag of, salt and vinegar chips, calling my name. It's like, I'm not perfect by any means, but I mean, it's worth focusing on your habits. You've heard me say this before. Human beings are habit-based creatures. You're gonna have habits. Some of your habits are gonna be imitations of patterns you see in others. It's not about whether or not you have habits. It's about how healthy can you develop your habit set. If injured, I say they're like older adults can have harder rehab, which is definitely the case, right? Your body doesn't physically bounce back the same way. And then that last point, that responding to health crises in a positive way makes a difference. And this is sort of this idea from before of like how you frame it, how you frame the story matters, right? If it's like sorry, my stomach again, sorry. If it's like part of this struggle and you're like, what did we say on the last slide? That like meaning provides resilience. It's like that's kind of the point again. So when you look at like physical health and social engagement, there's an interesting link between education and both education and verbal intelligence. So if you think of verbal intelligence as basically your ability to make sense of and create meaningful auditory communication, right? So like that could mean that you're good with your words and you're a good talker, but that doesn't necessarily need to mean that. It could also mean that you're really good at like listening and making use of that information. So here's an example of someone that could be decently high in verbal intelligence and not necessarily not someone that does long speeches and stuff. There's a lot of people that spend a lot of their day listening to things like podcasts and learning a lot of practical and like having a lot of high quality kind of thoughts while they're listening to stuff. It's like that's all verbal intelligence stuff. And it's like maybe education is related to that in the sense that maybe you're more likely to be exposed to more topics, or like it'd be interesting to kind of dig deep into why education plays such a factor and how where the limit of that increased influence is. Because you might actually find that education and verbal intelligence, you might actually be measuring a similar variable there. The complexity of cognitive challenges of older adults. Well, I guess that's maybe one of the reasons is to say obviously people with different education levels could have different verbal intelligences, right? Like some. And then there's other aspects of verbal intelligence too. Like there's wittiness and there's like timing, comedic timing, and like comedians would have super high verbal intelligence even if they didn't necessarily have like the greatest education. So maybe we should say education slash training, but the actual research is on like actual education, right? And I think that the general trend is the higher the education, there is a correlation between high levels of verbal intelligence and educational attainment. And part of that's the reverse, right? Actually, that's the thing I was tripping up on. I'm trying to say why education would do it, and it's probably the opposite. It's that verbal intelligence makes you better at school. And so that's why being better at school is associated with, right? So it's like a complicated, when you try to get into the causal aspect, the chicken and the egg argument. How complex a cognitive challenge is. Yeah, so I say they're like how much so like games like bridge and games like even cribbage and like I don't really know how to play bridge, to be honest. I've had people try to explain it to me before and I would kind of like to learn, because like anything that's interesting and complicated, kind of this idea, and that people take seriously and that are and kind of get engaged in, it's like once you're doing it, it can be engrossing, right? Like engrossing, is that the right word? Or engulfing or whatever, like engaging, psychological involvement, that word from before. Right? It's like those three people playing. They're playing like some game. They're also like, it looks like the guy in the blue shirts. Yeah, it looks like probably he's the one talking, and the woman in the pinks like kind of laughing, and it looks like the woman in the green shirt is like looking at the next card to play or whatever. It's like if you had them all in brain scanners, this is my point. There's a lot going on right there. There's a lot of positive. There's a lot of positive neurochemistry going on, and there's a lot of positive things in the body, and their cortisol levels are probably low, and they're probably breathing deeper. It's like all kinds of benefits in addition to just hanging out with your friends and that being nice. All right, so cognitive adventurousness. Now think about, what like going on an adventure is. Like how much are you willing to go on an adventure or try to learn a new thing? And especially if that thing is like a cognitive task, like something that challenges your thinking, right? That you have to like learn something new. Willingness to learn new things. The example I like to use for this is I remember she's not alive anymore, but I remember my grandma teaching her how to use YouTube, right? And like, or not necessarily teaching her, but just like showing her it, right? And that I remember asking her like just name something, and she'd say like some big band group, and I'd like look it up, and she'd be blown away that it's like honestly any song you can think of. And nowadays we're like, yeah, it's called a search engine, but like to that generation it's like magic almost, right? That they haven't maybe seen that thing in like 40 years or something. And it's like, or my grandpa, who was also earlier in this presentation, when he after his wife died, my grandma, one thing that he did is he got like really heavy into. I told you that he started like the Arthur Historical Society, or maybe I haven't told you that yet. And which is basically like a museum in Arthur dedicated to World War II mainly. And he started like messaging with people, right? And like he ended up like finding um other like soldiers and people, and like getting information, and all of a sudden he's like getting emails from people sending him pictures of like old battleships and all this stuff. And it's like, whatever the details, it's like, my point is that he was like getting fascinated, and that fascination, that hobby, that cognitive adventurousness is again psychotherapeutic. And not just psychotherapeutic. I don't just mean it's like nice. And that's not what psychotherapeutic means. When I say psychotherapeutic, I mean basically what we mean in the most general sense of like healing um, of the mind and the soul. But this is also cognitively stimulating and preventing decay. Okay, a few points here, right? And this, I've been kind of talking a little bit about this idea too, that like the social aspect is important. When I was talking about like playing crib, or I think I used church attendance as an example too. But so this first point, that nursing home residents will tend to report greater life satisfaction when they have more contact with family and friends. And some of that's sort of obvious, and some of that is why these last few years were so hard on people when they couldn't visit their loved ones, right? And when their loved ones couldn't be visited. Sorry, I'll cut myself off there. Elders who help others and remain active in the community exhibit higher physical and emotional functioning, right? And I have here as a side note that like even elders that have a significant health or issue around disability report high levels of satisfaction when they can help others. So like even somebody that needs support themselves, potentially having others that they're helping is psychotherapeutic, is related to life satisfaction. Which is interesting, because what's that meaning? It means like even people that need help themselves maybe want to feel like they're helping also. It's the, in a way, it's kind of the beauty of humanity. It's like there's something about true altruism, or true like trying to help your neighbor, being your brother and your sister's keeper, that is healing, right? And Viktor Frankl would be like, yeah, that's what we call logotherapy. And I've been telling you that the whole time, that meaning and purpose and humanity affects your immune system. Okay. Um, this is just another point for you to have, and I sort of just said this at the end of the last slide, that this idea of altruism, and you can think of altruism as just doing things in the truest sense, like, because this is a word that gets misused all the time, but like in a true sense, you're being altruistic if you're doing something for someone because you see that person as that being like a good thing for that person. You're not doing it because you're being rewarded or because you're getting attention for it. You're doing it because it's like, the example that's jumping into my head is like some of the older ladies or seniors that work at like the local hospitals and are there to basically help people that are lost, and they're just like this idea of volunteerism, right? Or like that guy that's like reading to the kids at the school, that actually older adults contribute to school programs more than any other demographic. And that's actually awesome. That's actually like good for both, right? It's good for the kids to have that intergenerational connection, especially in scenarios where it's obviously like maybe like a reading club or something like that. And it's like also great for the adult. I have here 10 to 30, like something like it says 10 to 30%. So I guess it depends on which survey you look at, of older adults are involved in some type of volunteer activity. You don't have to have that written down, but just this idea that it's like a pretty big source of meaning for a lot of adults, this idea of volunteerism. Yeah, I just wanted to show you this for a sec. So this is like, these are the mannequins, so it kind of looks a bit trippy, but this is like this showed the different, you know, Army, Air Force, Navy. Yeah, I think that was Army, Air Force, Navy. If any of you are interested in that stuff, like, and are ever in Arthur, you should check it out. It still exists. Obviously my grandpa's not running it anymore, but the younger guy that he was like doing it with is, I think. And yeah, just a lot of really unique kind of World War II and World War One stuff, and Korea and Vietnam. Okay, so sense of control is important to personal well-being, right? And this can be an issue, right? Because like one of the things that especially people that are in experiencing either like cognitive decline associated with things like Alzheimer's or just dementia more broadly, or whether they're experiencing limitations due to like physical injury and physical limitations that can impact their control. People seem to report that their life satisfaction and their kind of mental well-being tends to be highly associated, that second point, with how much they feel like they have people to call on, or not to call on, but like how much social support they perceive that they have. Like what that means is just like, it's interesting, right? Because it doesn't actually just say how much social support they have. And that's why it's a little bit more tricky to explain that comment. Because if it just said how much social support they have, that would be easy to explain. The perceived adequacy, how much they think that like the support they have is like enough, right? Because maybe like when my grandma was like, say like 10 years before she died, it's like she maybe needed a bit of social support. She didn't need tons. She would have said like, yeah, it's enough or whatever, right? It's like how, again, it's so much of it comes down to how people are making sense of it themselves. Again, that next point, the self-rating of health matters, right? And this kind of is true with everything. It's sort of like true with this idea of like how you make sense of your own life even at your current age matters, because it you and this is why I was saying before, be careful telling yourself a doom and gloom version of your life. And I have to remember that sometimes too, but it's like, why? Because you can start to believe it and you can start to see through that lens, and that might be somewhat true, but it might not be the full story, and it might not be fair to you for you to prioritize that lens, if that makes sense. it's uh it's kind of interesting, right? It's like psychology wants to acknowledge religion but not. So it's like, okay, so there's this tendency that people, human beings, like if we're aliens looking in, have this tendency to become way more religious later in life. And it may be because they have more stress, and it may be their way of coping, yeah, or it may be this idea that they're like, the whole idea of if things happen after, and like, the concept of the afterlife has fascinated humans since there were humans. And it's like one of the things that's, I was gonna say, like one of the oldest things that we even have records of human beings, and human beings in the broadest sense, like Homo sapiens and even Homo erectus and even Homo neanderthals and the Homo florensins and the Homo nadalis, like they buried their dead. Why do you bury your dead? Because you have beliefs about what happens after. It's beliefs of afterlife have been ubiquitous everywhere all the time. except maybe 2024 in North America where, everyone's whatever, doesn't believe or whatever. It's like, and I'm not trying to be cynical. I'm just saying, like, it's not weird that the more things get bad, the more people turn to answers that aren't right here. It's interesting because, like, so this one study was looking at Buddhists, Christians, Hindus, Taoists, Sikhs, Muslims, saying that, like, people that reported higher levels of faith reported less worrying about death, um, and tended to think more positively about their lives. Right? That this is the second point, that the association between religious faith and physical and mental health was reported from several faiths. Right? And it's like, well, if you haven't thought about those ideas and then all of a sudden you're forced to consider those ideas, that can be a scary situation. And the idea is maybe religion gives people a way of talking about and thinking about some of those things. And that's why it's sometimes hard to talk about super deep topics without getting into language that almost sounds religious, because that's sort of how we talk about, good and evil and heaven and hell and the afterlife and these ideas. That it's like, I don't know a different word for that doesn't sound religious. It's like, because again, if you're like, well, the way to say it without sounding religious is that you're dirt after you die, it's like, well, that's a religious belief too. That's like an atheistic religious belief. That's a belief that you have, that the nature of reality is that consciousness ends at the end of physical life. That's not proved. And just like whatever. So yeah, it's a strange world. Okay, next slide. Yeah, like personally, I feel at a weird state with all this topic because, like, the last thing in the world I would want to do is like judge your position and what you believe, or like try to push you in any direction, right? And that's not my intention here, and I hope that that's obvious. Um, all I'm saying is that the literature is pretty clear that there seems to be like a connection between coping and like the religious coping, or that idea of like it helping provide a system of understanding. And just even think about the fact, like, even if you're not that religious or whatever, that like even things like funerals, right? It's like, what's that? That's like an act of remembrance, and also a way of like trying to give a dignified ending to what we consider to be a meaningful human life. It's like, even if you don't look at the religious side of it, it's, and that there's other things, right? Like, so there, it's this idea that like religious service attendance also can provide social support for people, and it can be like nice to be around people that actually care about you. And so, like, again, I'm not trying to make arguments of different faiths against each other, or even faith against not faith. Just saying this idea of like, when you're overwhelmed with questions like this, where are you turning? Are you, and who are you talking to about it, right? And it's like this tendency to get more religious as you get older. And religious, again, I know so many people have so much resistance to even just that word, but just even, and if you do, it's like, what I'm really talking about is like how you understand life and yourself, and if you think there's a God, and if you think there's an afterlife, and if what you think happens to you after you die, and if you think that you're connected to your ancestors, and if you think that you have any influence on people after, or are you just part of, you just become dust, right? And it's like those questions are going to become more pressing when you're getting closer to your physical end. And so then it's like, do you have a system of belief to help you through that is kind of the idea. And just to acknowledge that I obviously know that there's been lots of issues with religion and lots of human evil. In healthy situations, religious institutions can provide, though, important, like, okay, avenues for helping other people, right? And if I've been making this point for several slides, that like meaningful engagement in ways that are beneficial to others is like psychotherapeutic as we're getting older. And so like this ability to have intergenerational, or like having older people actively involved in the lives of the next generation through like teaching and mentorship and structuring and passing on younger beliefs and knowledge to the next generation, right? That can be, that's what humans have done throughout all of history. That is actually the history of humanity, right? It's the transmission of culture. Okay, so basically this idea that that's one of some of the things that kind of setting can provide. I think this is also like something that's interesting to maybe think about, especially if you're Dr. Mike's marriage and dating advice show. Just joking. That'd be a colossal failure. But no, this idea of like, maybe you should consider that if you're like, especially if you're at the stage of like maybe considering a more long-term partner, that like what you're going to care about later. It's like the research is pretty clear. You're going to care about loyalty, familiarity, companionship, mutual investment. Basically, it's the idea of like as marriages tend to, get better. And this is one of the interesting things, is that this is the stage in life where there tend to be some of the highest ratings of marital satisfaction. I say they're like, yeah, before I explain this, yeah, so just that first point, loyalty, familiarity, companionship, what's that really mean? Like the depth, those are all like depth, I'm pronouncing that weird, but like DEPTH, related variables, right? Those are all like quality of relationship, that you're committed to this person, you're invested in this person, that you have so much shared history with this person, you're well, if we're talking about a marriage, maybe like you're like you have a union with this person, that there's these higher levels of pleasure, less conflict. Older couples tend to resolve conflict in more affectionate, less negative ways than not than younger people, but than they did when they were younger, right? So it's this idea that it's not comparing like older couples with younger couples, it's comparing an older couple with how they were when they were younger, that if you can stick it out, if you can get through the tough times, if you can get, as we've learned in this course, sort of past the 8 to 10 year mark, it's like you can start to work through stuff that's been tough. And you can remember last week we used that term skilled diplomacy. It's like, yeah, there's even a level higher than that where it stops even being just diplomacy, and there's like just being together. It was like a Hallmark card. Okay, let's keep going here. I love you guys. I hope you're enjoying the class. I said that already, but let's keep going. Um, in terms of like the passing of a partner, and obviously like one of the most difficult parts of things that would happen in anybody's life, and both, and this is such an awkward thing in some ways to think about, like if I was to pass, like if I would want my wife to remarry or vice versa, and I probably would, because it would probably be good. It's like obviously like not fun to think about, but like there's benefit associated with it. Men remarry at higher rates, quite a bit higher than women. Some of that though is demographic, in the sense that women tend to live longer, and so just statistically, there just is a lot more older women, especially in Canadian society, a lot more older women than older men. Um, so yeah, so again, kind of an awkward topic, but the research does show that like if someone remarries and it's a healthy relationship, it uh it has benefits, right? Here we got a visitor. Can you say hello, Scotty? Okay, don't go on the keyboard though. So married older adults tend to just chill for a sec, Scotty. Tend to report. So these are just more benefits, right? That like, and again, it's like, well, what about if you're not married? What about there's probably a lot of again, it's kind of like things I've said earlier in the course. If it's a long-term relationship characterized by commitment, intimacy, and passion, those like Sternberg triactic theory or whatever, it's like that's kind of more important than whether you have like the piece of paper from the state. But it's like one of the reasons why marriage is valuable is this idea of like the oath or this idea of a commitment to each other, and that there's like and anyways, so the um the concept is that like life's tough and that having someone to go through life with is different than not, and that married adults tend to report higher levels of life satisfaction, better overall physical health, lower rates of ending up in like a senior's home, and the advantage statistically is much higher for men. So this is like saying that like yeah, quite a few advantages for older women that are married compared to older women that aren't, but the amount of difference between older men who are single and older men who are married is is quite significant. It's a greater difference. Stage of life friendship still important, right? You might want to just have this kind of down because it's this idea that like still having a network of people around you, and that in addition to keeping you engaged and stuff, that like it's associated with things like life satisfaction and self-esteem and feeling less lonely, and that all sort of makes sense that like if you have friends and if you're doing stuff that's fun, you feel better and you maybe feel better about yourself and you feel less lonely, and it can provide like companionship and laughter and shared activity, and can maybe provide you somebody that you can do something nice for, right? Your buddy's coming over, you do something nice for them. It's like we talked already about how like doing nice things for people is therapeutic too, and maybe they can help you with stuff that you need help with, and again, maybe it's like it can be mutually therapeutic. That's a good friendship is kind of mutually therapeutic, I guess. Is a weird way to say it, but so we see that in older adults, like that men's friendship, if we compare men to women, like if we do a gender comparison or yeah, sex comparison, I guess, that we see that these patterns are like a continuation of what we saw earlier in life, right? That men's friendships tend to involve less disclosure and intimacy. Women tend to have larger friend networks. Both sexes report similar satisfaction and emotional support. So basically, this idea that even though men tend to maybe share less personal details and maybe don't have as many people that they're interacting with, it seems to be just as related to mental health, right? So it's like just as psychologically significant. It's just experienced differently. And that those differences seem, the point I have in my note is that these patterns are a continuation of um, what we've seen throughout the lifespan in terms of a sex-based difference. This word fictive kin is kind of like an interesting idea, right? And a lot of you have probably had like a friend that's like almost like part of the family. That's sort of what this term means. Not really the family, but the family. See how fictive and fiction are similar words, and then kin means family. It's interesting, right? It's like, okay, um, I have on the side note here, it appears that retirement's not a factor that necessarily predicts happiness, but it's more whether or not the individual was satisfied with life earlier in adulthood. It's like, the thing is that how you, so that's actually interesting. It's not like one of the biggest predictors of how your mental health when you're older is your mental health now. It's like your mental health doesn't change just because of retirement, and for a lot of people it can either be a stressor or not, and it kind of depends on how much control they have in the situation. And but what's interesting is that when you study it, you see that it's retirement's not necessarily linked to subjective well-being very much at all statistically when they've studied it. Right now, it is more for people that didn't have control, right? So if like the plant shuts down and people are retired early, that's more likely to be a negative situation than somebody that sort of decided to retire on their own, right? So that's that last point. Those that had less control over the decision tend to respond less well, and that makes complete sense because what's less control mean? Probably that they were laid off, right? So the more it's kind of someone's decision, the less likely they're to have negative emotion with it. You've survived chapter 12. See you next time for chapter 13. You're awesome students, and I hope this presentation was okay. Cheers and take care. Have a great week.